All right, my producer, Ryan, will not leave me alone. Now, back up a second. Full disclosure, we like Belal Muhammad over here at Bad Guy Inc. We like Belal Muhammad because he works his ass off and he has a strategy. We respect that. We respect anybody that gets out there, gets his message out there, has a plan for he's going to do it. Oh, by the way, it worked. He goes from a guy with an unusual first name to a main eventer. And he did it in very quick time. From the time that Belal sat down with, I imagine, with a pad of paper and a pen and started writing things down and then activated that, he's now a main eventer. I'm very confident in telling you his next fight is going to be a main event. I believe he's going to take the main event on ABC opposite Chimaev. Either way, we like it. So Ryan comes to me and he's laughing. He can almost not even tell me the story that Belal Muhammad has come up with his Mount Rushmore for the welterweight division. BJ Penn, no, I've already ruined it. George St. Pierre, T. Wood, Matt Hughes, maybe BJ Penn. Now, I got a problem with that right there. You can't put a question mark on number 4. Mount Rushmore very clearly means, who are your top 4? Instead of saying who are your top 4, we say, who is your Mount Rushmore? The terms are absolutely exclusive. Okay. Maybe BJ Penn. Now, here's what Ryan liked. He did not, I'm talking about Belal. Belal did not put Kamaru Usman on there and said, I will not show him that respect until he beats me. Ryan loved that. He thought that was really great. Now, I just had this same conversation, kinda, 2 days ago. And I was asked, is Charles Oliveira the absolute best lightweight of all time? I said no. So, who's better? Well, and I said BJ Penn. And they said, well, how do you get to that conclusion? And here is what I said. I said, well, Freddie Roach said that BJ Penn is the best boxer in our sport. BJ Penn won the World Jiu-Jitsu Championship. He combined this great boxing and a World Jiu-Jitsu Championship to turn it into UFC Championship. Plural. That was my answer, was BJ Penn. Is that right? Am I right about that? Because competition is not the same. And I know that pains somebody, but I feel I can say it because it's true for me too. I had a really hard career with some really hard fights. The truth is, guys are better now. I only stepped away 3 years ago. They're just better now. And they'll be better next year. Better a few years from now. So it's really hard to juxtapose, right? It's really hard to take a guy, no matter how great he was, and BJ Penn was great. It's really hard to take that and then put him with today's era. I'm just wondering if you guys agree. And where does my disrespect of Charles come from? Because I don't feel that I have it. I really admire Charles Oliveira. I really do acknowledge 155 pounds right now to be the hardest division in the industry, the hardest division in the history of the industry, and he's the king. So I don't know that I'm disrespecting him. But it is one of those really interesting spots. And look, Charles versus Islam works. And that wasn't true a week ago. And it wasn't true a week ago because of Charles. People that really like Charles and are trying to get on the bandwagon did not want that fight. Because Islam's going to go out and not only beat him, he's going to beat him for 5 rounds. The other side of the coin is, how bad do I want to see Islam on top? Like, a fight just didn't work. And it largely didn't work because Charles had the worst thing that you can possibly have. It's what you strive for every single day. You're striving for the wrong thing, which is an aura of invincibility. That's a terrible thing to have. That does not draw. The only guy that has ever drawn within our sport that had invincibility was George St. Pierre, but he worked his ass off to convince you, the audience, that he wasn't invincible. George St. Pierre is the only guy in history to have a championship belt, a beautiful record, and show up to every single press conference, compliment his opponent, and put himself down. He was doing that because he was well aware. You guys find out how good I really am. If I convince you guys, which will be easy to do, I'm going to win every single minute of this fight. How many of you are going to watch, right? I mean, it was just one of those things. George had to work extremely hard to pull away from his own abilities, and it worked, and all of you guys tuned in. But it's a really hard thing to have. And if you do look at Oliveira today, it's very different. I'm comparing him with Islam. that specific match, you look at that very different. From coming to a conclusion that Islam is going to be the next champion, all the way down to Islam is the rightful champion, all the way down that Islam is the absolute best, all the way down to the only person I can even question is Islam, is Khabib. Where you then have teammates and coaches, Coach Javier, just by example, coming out and comparing the two of them. Islam got so good in our minds, and may actually be, but whether you are or not, you don't want to convince people, right? It's one of those things. If everybody knows it, right, it can become a problem. So good, even in the absence of notoriety and in the absence of a championship, that we were beginning to compare him to a matchup that we knew we could never get. You got to be pretty goddamn good to have a community fantasizing about a match that they know they cannot get. And now we see how good Charles is. Like, that is a very different match right now. That is a very, very different outcome. And you particularly just look at the X's and O's of you see how good Charles can do on the ground, but you're also very confident that he's going to be here. You're very confident that Islam's going to take him down. So now it comes back, right? Like the idea that we had in 1993 when we started this sport of comparing styles and finding out which discipline, not which athlete, not which camp, not what training method, which discipline was better. That still works to this day. We just don't generally get to see it. So when you do have people that are gung-ho and jiu-jitsu is back and submitting people on the ground, and I told you so and I knew that this worked. When you have that, but now that is going to be tested. Because it's either going to work or it's not. If Islam's on top of this guy for 25 minutes, Islam has no jiu-jitsu background, and he mauls this guy for 25 minutes, you see where that starts to hurt people's feelings. You see where, okay, there's more on the line here. It's more on the line than just a championship and a beautiful record. There's something greater that actually brings back nostalgia because it precedes current time and it goes back to the predication of the entire sport. So it really is a very different match. I am not only completely wide open to this, I am confident in telling you it's the direction we're going to go. And I'm only confident because of the comment that Dana White said down at the press conference where he said I was going to make Islam versus Benny, and Joe Rogan just grabbed me and told me I shouldn't. Absent of Dana making that one comment, I would not think that that's the direction we're going to go. As a matter of fact, if we're just to look at history, and I realize that you guys are a little tired of hearing me say this, but most recent history of this exact same situation was Benavidez Figueiredo, and the way that was handled is we just redid the match, made the champion make weight. But now we're confronted, it came out this morning, that this last UFC, I believe they called it 274, but Oliveira versus Gaethje being the main event, was the biggest pay-per-view of 2022. Because everybody always wants to tell me, they always think there's a great conspiracy in MMA, and the decision is going to be made fully on business. You guys don't even know what the business is. You always turn that, you don't even know what the business is. But you do always make that argument, so why aren't you making it now? Why aren't you arguing if Gaethje versus Oliveira is the biggest fight of 2022, and we do have a most recent precedent set with Figueiredo versus Benavidez, why are you not predicting that we're just going to remake Gaethje versus Oliveira? It's an interesting one. I still think that option should be on the table. I'm just happy to acknowledge for you guys that it isn't. For reasons that I don't know, it is not. I would feel you have 3 options on the table. What's going to happen with Conor McGregor? Okay, great. Let's discuss it. Let's set that on the table and go ahead and discuss that. Bringing Islam in, since you know that Benny is hurt. Can't argue Benny. He's got this beautiful record and a rightful claim in the right ranking as well. He's injured. Got to push him aside. And Justin Gaethje. Those seem to be the 3 options, but they're not. Gaethje is not in the discussion. Well, now that we're confronted with the fact that it was the biggest pay-per-view of the year, and then that's another confusing number, not for nothing. But the way that this pay-per-view business works, this is not scientific. I am telling you how this works. It should not work this way. You should look closer at your numbers. But the way that it works is whatever the main event is will get the credit. And then whoever won the main event gets it all put on him. Right? Like if Charles had lost this fight and Gaethje had won, it would be that Gaethje, the way the story would be told is that Gaethje was the biggest drawing pay-per-view of the year because Charles won. But I've got a question to you guys, not for nothing. Whether it was a dud of a fight or not, that has nothing to do with the pay-per-view buys. They were already purchased. Rose is a top 5 draw in our industry. Are you guys aware of that? I really do think that a lot of the needle that night moved for Rose. You've always going to have a fan base with Tony Ferguson. Chandler will now have that. Chandler is not the draw that Chandler thinks he is, but now he's right. He is now. Chandler is hitting grand slams every single direction that you go. I mean, he is getting recognized publicly. Just Conor McGregor, but just an example. When Conor talks about somebody on social media, it is not nice. He was. I mean, BT Sports is picking. Chandler's hot right now. Chandler's really hot right now, but I can't credit him. I just can't. I can't credit him for being part of the draw of the biggest pay-per-view, thus point of the year. He will be in his next one. Chael's opinion, not scientific. But I do think that those numbers get really interesting. The night that Roy Jones fought Mike Tyson and they did 1.7, they took all of the credit. I think if you look closer, I think that Jake Paul brought in a huge part of those numbers. I'm only sharing with you guys that it is very interesting how that's perceived. Anything that you study, if you ever study numbers, if you ever take a class and you study data, the one thing that you will come to the conclusion of is not how to assess and do data. You will understand the absolute manipulation and misinterpretation that people will have of numbers. Do I think that Charles versus Gaethje in a non-title fight did huge? No, I do not. Do I think that Charles Oliveira moved the needle more? And this is the way the story will be told. Charles deserves this. I'm not giving him a hard time. No, I don't believe that any of that's true. And moreover, when I saw those pay-per-view numbers, the number one thing that it made me reflect on was what should have been the biggest fight in history. What for sure, if you just want to narrow it a little bit more to make sure that your bet is accurate, the biggest heavyweight fight in history, going to outdo any number that we've ever seen, took place in this year. Ngannou versus Surreal. Now, I knew leading into that, neither one of those guys held up the bargain. Neither one of those guys did their job. We had nothing to talk about with Surreal versus Francis if it was not for the coach of Surreal who came out and told us a backstory. Whatever numbers they did, thank you to that coach specifically. But I didn't know they bombed that bad. I didn't know that they were I don't know where they are. I just know that they were less than. According to the reports, 400,000. I do look at that. What do you do with that? What do you do with that moving forward? Numbers matter. What does Tyson Fury think about that? Right? If a guy's not drawing in his own industry, what the hell are you going to bring him to a different industry for? How are you going to interpret that? Surreal, who laid the egg bigger than Francis, even though Francis did not uphold his bargain into that fight, he was not as bad as Surreal. Surreal, prior to that fight, during that fight, and since that fight, has done nothing but put his head in the sand, and Surreal's next fight's going to be a main event in his home country. So, I mean, it's one of those things. If you can go out and you can double-cross somebody, and the next thing that you do is going to be a main event on home soil. What was your motivation to not double-cross my second time? I'm just sharing with you. It's a very interesting thing. Like when these numbers come out, how you want to look at that and how you want to interpret it really is in the eye of the beholder. And if you are looking at the biggest pay-per-view of the year, like, whoa, so far, that sounds great. You might be surprised that it was 400,000, but pay-per-view is a completely different model now than the one that you grew up. I mean, it is so vast. 400, that's a very good number. Very good. If you saw 6 and 7, oh my God, how did they do that, right? Just one of these things. Look at Canelo. Canelo also fought. These numbers are very consistent. Very good, but that's very high. I'm only sharing that with you. How bad did the heavyweights bomb? And who are you going to give the credit to? And the way that the story will be told was whoever was the main event and moreover, whoever won. So the way that the story is right now, Charles Oliveira, that's your answer. But had Justin Gaethje won, your answer would be Justin Gaethje. But now that you are confronted with this, even if you want to deny those numbers and say that something that I said is true, that Ferguson and Chandler helped move the needle and moreover Rose specifically helped to move that, you're still confronted with the same thing of how it will be looked at. And I've argued for you from Jump Street If you're discussing what's next for Charles, you've got a few options, but Justin Gaethje should be part of that discussion. I'm not coming off it.